plan was I wanted to kill as many women I thought were prostitutes as I possibly could. I thought I could kill as many of them as I wanted without getting caught.
On November 5th, 2003, Gary Leon Ridgway pleaded guilty to murdering 48 women. He admitted he was the legendary Green River Killer, a serial murderer who held the Pacific Northwest captive to a rampage of killings that spanned almost 2 decades.
And Mr. Ridgway, is it your desire to plead guilty to the 48 charges of aggravated murder in the first degree because you believe that you are guilty of each of those offenses?
Yes.
One by one, as the dates, locations, and names of his victims were read in court, Gary Ridgway impassively acknowledged each and every murder.
For the death of Wendy Lee Caulfield.
Guilty.
For the death of Colleen R. Brockman.
Guilty.
For the death of Yvonne S. Antosh.
Guilty.
For the death of Patricia M. Barzak.
Guilty.
In his confession, Ridgway told police he murdered at least 90 women. So many that he literally could not keep track of their faces, their names, or sometimes even where he discarded their bodies. His victims were prostitutes and runaways who lived in and around Seattle, Washington. Some as young as 16 years old.
Like many other serial killers, Ridgway targeted vulnerable people. And prostitutes are the most vulnerable of all.
He is America's most prolific serial killer. And his first victims were found here on the Green River.
Everybody was terrified. You know, I mean, these were places where we picnicked, where we swam, where children ran free up until this time when, you know, bodies started showing up.
It began on July 15th, 1982, when 2 children spotted a nude body floating below the Peck Bridge. Her name was Wendy Lee Caulfield, a 16-year-old runaway who had been strangled. 4 weeks later, the nude strangled body of Deborah Bonner was found floating face down in the river.
Once the killing started, everyone was rather mystified. I mean, they thought, is this the work of more than one person? And where does it begin and where does it end? And how could this be? I mean, they were all in the Green River.
And the killings continued. 3 days later, on August 15th,
we were told by a rafter that he'd been floating down the river. He saw 2, what he thought were mannequins alongside the riverbank, and as he got closer, realized that they weren't mannequins, but indeed they were human bodies.
Their names were Cynthia Hines and Marcia Chapman. They were submerged in chest-deep water, held under by boulders. Both had been strangled.
The thing that really stuck out in my mind was Marcia Chapman's hand. One of her arms were free and waving in the water, kind of saying to me, help, you know, here I am. It's an image in my mind that will never go away.
As lead detective Dave Reichert made his way down the hill towards the bodies, he actually came upon another victim splayed in the tall grass. Her name was Opal Mills. At the time, Reichert didn't know that evidence recovered from these crime scenes would be instrumental in capturing the Green River Killer nearly 20 years later. But at the moment the victims were being dredged from the river, Ridgway was just minutes away, working at the Kenworth Truck Company in Seattle. By 1982, he'd been working there for 11 years.
Gary was a painter and he was a taper. They taped the designs onto the trucks.
It was a job that required neatness and precision, the ideal position for Gary Ridgway.
meticulous. He wanted to make sure everything was just perfect to him.
He may have been precise, but to many of his co-workers, something was not quite right about Gary Leon Ridgway.
When a woman walked by, most guys will look and they'll go kind of, hey, you know, but he kind of like got lost in his thoughts.
But no one suspected how different Gary Leon Ridgway really was. As fall turned to winter in 1982, no one in Seattle had any idea as to the identity of the Green River Killer, even though he was hidden amongst them in plain sight.
You know, he was really unremarkable until it was discovered that he had killed dozens of women. And that's part of the secret of his success. He looks and acts like everybody else, and he acts and looks like nobody in particular. So he gets away with it.
Even 20 years later, many friends and neighbors still find it hard to believe.
He's a wonderful person. He's the type of person you can walk up to and hug and say, hey, Gary, how are you doing?
But if police had known more about Gary Ridgway's life, beginning with his childhood, they may not have been surprised that this hard-working family man was secretly the Green River Killer. In August of 1982, the bodies of the first victims of the Green River Killer were found. Fear quickly spread through the quiet suburbs that line the river.
My biggest fear, quite honestly, was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and somebody's getting ready to dump a body, and here I am there to witness it. And that whole summer, anytime you were in a car by yourself, there was police around asking you what you were doing.
A major investigation of the murders was launched by Washington's King County Police and other local law enforcement agencies. They realized a serial killer was at work. He appeared to be targeting the streetwalkers who worked the Strip, a notorious stretch of the Pacific Highway South that ran from SeaTac into Seattle.
They make the perfect victim. They're getting into a car and they're trying to do it secretly because they don't want to get caught by the undercover police officer that might be watching. They don't want to get caught by the patrol officer driving by. So as far as victims go, he picked easy targets.
By the end of 1983, 13 bodies had been found and 24 more women had been reported missing. Some of them were last seen in a pickup truck. The police followed every tip, including one that actually led to Gary Ridgway for the first time. A young woman named Marie Malvar disappeared. A witness saw her get into a pickup truck and later noticed the vehicle parked at Ridgway's house. The police interviewed Ridgway, who convinced them he was not their man.
He has this unassuming, unintimidating demeanor. You could stand next to him in a grocery line. You would never, ever expect that this is the Green River Killer.
Ridgway's life began in unremarkable circumstances. Born in Salt Lake City, Utah on February 18,